A deal made at the kitchen table. The truck came up the long dirt road on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, raising a thin tail of dust that Marisol Delgado watched from the doorway of her barn before she could make out the make or the color. She had learned to read approaching vehicles the way her father had taught her to read weather, by their pace, by the angle of the dust, by whether they slowed at the property gate or pushed through without hesitating. This one slowed. It stopped at the gate entirely, and the man got out to open it by hand even though it wasn't latched, which meant he wasn't from around here, and he wasn't going to assume anything about her land that she hadn't given him permission to assume. She set down the bucket she was carrying and waited. The truck was a faded blue Ford that had seen too many dry seasons, and when it pulled up to the yard and stopped, 3 children climbed out before the driver had even cut the engine. The oldest was a boy of maybe 9 or 10, serious-faced and already looking at the barn the way boys do when they're trying to figure out if there's work in it. The middle one was a girl around 7, holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. And the smallest was a little girl, perhaps 3 years old, who walked straight to the nearest fence post and held onto it with both hands as though she had decided it belonged to her. The man who stepped out of the truck was not what Marisol had pictured when she had placed the notice in town. She had pictured someone older, someone with the particular settled tiredness of a man who had spent 30 years on other people's land and needed a quiet place to finish out his working years. Hector Ruiz was not that. He was perhaps 35, lean in the way that comes from working rather than from not eating, with hands that confirmed everything his posture tried to understate. He took off his hat when he reached her, which her father would have noted approvingly, and he said his name clearly and waited.
"I got your letter,"
Marisol said.
"You mentioned references?" "Yes, ma'am. Don Seferino Aguilar in Presidio, and the Hargrove operation outside of Marfa. I can give you their numbers."
"I already called them," she said. He looked at her steadily. He did not ask what they had said. "The position is ranch hand and general operations," she said. "The house I described in the notice is the small one behind the main barn, 2 bedrooms. It needs work on the porch. The salary is what I wrote. You'd be taking your meals in the main house with me and my son when he visits, because I'm not running 2 kitchens." "That's fine," Hector said. "Your children would be in the house with you. There's a school bus that comes to the road at 6:40 in the morning. The youngest is too small for school yet." "She stays with me," he said, and for the first time something in his voice changed slightly, a quiet firmness that was not defensive, just clear. "She doesn't go anywhere I can't see her." Marisol looked at the little girl who had released the fence post and was now examining a line of ants along the ground with scientific concentration.
"What's her name?" "Lucia. The boy is Marco. The girl with the rabbit is Pilar."
"They can use the yard,"
Marisol said. "I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is disorder. This ranch runs on a schedule, and I expect that schedule to be kept. If something breaks, you tell me before I find it myself. If you have a concern, you bring it to me directly. And if at any point this arrangement isn't working, we give each other 2 weeks' notice. That's not a negotiation. That's a condition." "Understood," he said. She studied him for a moment. Don Seferino had told her he was the best worker the old man had ever had. The Hargrove foreman had said simply, "You'd be lucky." She had learned over 3 years of running this ranch alone that luck was not the word people used when they were being imprecise. They used it when they meant something true that they didn't have a category for.
"You can start Monday,"
she said. "Today you can get the house opened up. I'll send Marco, my son, he's older, when he visits. Or, actually, there's a key on the hook by the back door. I'll show you." She turned and walked toward the house, and after a brief pause she heard his boots on the gravel behind her. The 3 children followed at a small distance, Marco already drifting toward the barn, Pilar holding her rabbit, Lucia trotting to keep up with a stride twice her size. In the kitchen, Marisol took the key from its hook and turned to hand it to him. She noticed him notice the row of mugs on the shelf above the stove, her own, the one Diego used when he visited, and Roberto's, the dark blue ceramic with a small chip on the handle that she had never thrown away. She had tried once, holding it over the trash, and found she couldn't explain to herself what she was actually doing, so she had put it back and not thought about it in specific terms since. Hector took the key without looking at the mugs again. "The kitchen closes at 7 in the evening," she said. "If the children need something after that, there's a basket on the counter. I keep crackers and fruit in it. Help yourself to that without asking." "Thank you," he said. The words were not elaborate. She respected that. He stayed. That was the first thing she registered at the end of the first week, and she knew it was a small thought, but it was not nothing. Men had come before, 2 of them since Roberto died, one who lasted 11 days and left without explanation, one who lasted 3 weeks and then offered her an arrangement of a different kind, which she had declined so directly that he had not waited for sunrise to pack. Hector stayed. And in the staying, he was quiet in the way that productive men are quiet. Always somewhere, doing something, never in a place she needed him not to be. By the end of the second week, she knew where he was without having to look. He was in the barn at 5:30 before she was, because she could hear the animals settling differently when someone was already in there with them. He was at the back fence by 8, because that was where the posts had been rotting since spring, and she had told him on the first day, and he had not asked to be reminded. He was at the kitchen table at noon with Lucia on his knee, eating whatever was in front of him without comment, giving the little girl small pieces off his plate with the automatic attention of a man who had been doing it since before she was steady on her feet. She watched that, sometimes from the counter. She did not let herself examine why. On a Friday at the end of the second week, she sat down across from him at the kitchen table after the children had gone to the small house for the evening. She had a folder in front of her and a cup of coffee that had gone from hot to warm. She opened the folder and set it between them without preamble. "I want to talk about the arrangement," she said. He set down his own cup and looked at her. "What I have here is a ranch that runs at a break-even in a good year," she said. "This has not been a good year. I have 1 full-time hand, which is you, and I have 2 part-time boys from town who come on branding days, and that's it. My husband built this operation for 2 people to run. I've been running it alone for 3 years, and I can tell you exactly what it's cost me." She tapped the folder. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand what I need." "Yeah." Hector said nothing. His hands were flat on the table, steady. "What I need," Marisol said, and here she stopped, because she had rehearsed this part, and now that it was in her mouth it tasted different than it had in her head, "is someone who stays. Not for a season, not until something better comes along. What I'm proposing is that you move from an employment arrangement into something more permanent, as in legal, as in a marriage, on paper, for the sake of the ranch's standing with the county and with the bank, and for the sake of your children having stability." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a coyote was making noise somewhere past the south fence, and the cattle shifted. "I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel," she said, because the silence was going on too long. "I'm not asking you to forget your wife. This isn't about that. What it is about is that this land needs 2 names on its paperwork to be taken seriously by people who want to take it from me. And your children need an address that doesn't change every 8 months. This isn't about feelings. It's about survival." Hector looked at the folder, then at her. His voice, when he spoke, was the way the air is just before rain, still and carrying something. "My kids," he said. "They'd stay? They'd be settled here?" "Yes." "And you'd be all right with Lucia? She's 3 and she has a lot of energy and she doesn't always sleep through the night." "I know," Marisol said. "I've been here." He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down. It was the most uncertain she had seen him. "Can I think about it until morning?" "Yes," she said. "Then I'll think about it until morning," he said. And he got up, thanked her for dinner in the same quiet way he always did, and went out across the yard to the small house, where, through the window, she could see the lamp go on and stay on for a long time after the rest of the ranch went dark. She washed the cups. She left Roberto's on the shelf. In the morning, before she had put the coffee on, he was at her back door. He knocked twice, the way a man knocks when he has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. "Yes," he said when she opened the door. That was all. She nodded. She stepped back to let him in. "Coffee's not ready yet," she said. "I know," he said. "I can make it." She handed him the bag from the cabinet, and he made the coffee, and they stood in her kitchen while the morning came up orange over the eastern hills, not saying anything more, because there was nothing more that needed to be said yet. They signed nothing that first morning. Marisol understood that a deal made at a kitchen table before sunrise was not nothing, but it was also not the same as a document, and she was a woman who had learned to be precise about the distance between those two things. Roberto used to say she had a lawyer's mind in a rancher's body, which he had meant as a compliment and which she had taken as one, because he had never once suggested that either half of her was the wrong half. She spent that first day after the agreement going about her work the way she always did, which meant she was up on the north pasture by 7 and at the feed store in Terlingua by noon and back at the ranch checking water levels in the east trough before the light went. What was different was that she was aware, in a way she had not been the previous 2 weeks, of where Hector was at each part of the day. He was at the broken gate on the south fence line when she came back from Terlingua, the one she had been meaning to get to since June, down in the dirt with the hinges laid out in order beside him like a man who thought in sequences. He looked up when her truck passed and raised one hand and went back to what he was doing. She thought briefly of Roberto's particular way of waving, which had been more of a signal than a greeting, a slight lift of 2 fingers that said, "I see you. Carry on." Hector's wave was different. It was complete. It said nothing except, "I see you," and she was not sure why that distinction mattered, but it sat with her as she drove on. Marco, her son, called that evening. He called every Thursday and sometimes on Sundays, and this was a Thursday, and she had been expecting it. He was 24 and living in Odessa, where he worked in logistics for an oil services company, which was a life so different from anything she had raised him for that she had stopped trying to picture it and simply listened when he told her about it. He was a good son. He was also a son who had grown up watching his mother run a ranch alone and had formed opinions about what that meant for her dignity that he had not entirely shared with her yet. She told him about Hector. There was a silence. "You hired the man with 3 kids?" Diego said. "His name is Marco," she said, then caught herself. "The worker's name is Hector. His son is also named Marco." "Okay," her son Diego said in the tone he used when he was filing something away to think about more carefully later. "He's good," she said. "Don Ceferino sent him." "Don Ceferino is 82 years old. He still knows a good worker." "Mama," Diego said, and then stopped. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I called because I wanted you to know. Now you know. Will I meet him when I come at Christmas?" "Before that, probably," she said. "If things keep the way they're going, there'll be a branding in October and I'll need you for a day or 2. "All right," Diego said. She did not tell him about the arrangement. Not yet. There was a sequence to these things, and she had always believed in sequence. On the Saturday of the 3rd week, Lucia found the cat. The cat had been living in the feed barn for as long as Marisol could remember, a gray, long-bodied thing with no name that caught mice and wanted nothing from anyone, which Marisol had always found to be a reasonable way to live. Lucia found it sleeping on a sack of grain and stood over it for a long time before she reached down and very carefully put one small hand on its back. Not petting, just resting her palm there, as though she wanted to know if it was real. The cat did not move. Lucia looked up at Marisol, who had been passing through with a ledger. "Cat," Lucia said. "Yes," Marisol said. "Name?"
She doesn't have one.
Lucia considered this with a seriousness that her entire face participated in.
Necesita one,
she said, the Spanish slipping in the way it did with children who lived between two languages, the seam showing briefly and then closing.
Maybe you should give her one,
Marisol said. She hadn't meant it as an invitation, just an acknowledgement, but Lucia took it as the former.
Nube,
she said. Cloud. She looked at the cat.
Nube,
she said again, more officially. The cat blinked. Marisol wrote it in no ledger, but she remembered it. That evening she told Hector at dinner, not because it was important, but because it had been the kind of small moment that wants to be told to someone. He listened and smiled, the way fathers smile when their children do things that are completely characteristic and still surprising. She names everything, he said. She named my boots last year. Left one is Pedro, right one is something she won't tell me. Marisol did not intend to laugh. She did, anyway. And she noticed, the way you notice a gate that's been stuck for a long time swinging open, that it had been a while since that had happened at her own table. What the children remember. 3 weeks into the arrangement, the small house behind the barn had become a different place. Marisol had not gone inside it since Hector and the children moved in. She made a point of not going inside it, because it was their space, and the line between what was hers and what was theirs was one she intended to hold, clearly. But she could see it from the kitchen window, and what she saw was a house that was being lived in with intention. Someone had patched the porch boards she had mentioned exactly once. The children's shoes appeared in the mornings lined up beside the door in size order, which she recognized as the habit of a man who imposed small structures because he understood that small structures hold things together when larger ones fail. A clay pot appeared on the windowsill with something green coming up in it, which she thought might be cilantro, and which made the house look suddenly less temporary. Pilar, the middle child, had decided that Marisol's kitchen was available to her between 4 and 5 in the afternoon when she came home from school, and this was not something Marisol had agreed to so much as discovered. She would come in the back door with her backpack still on, set her things on the bench near the door where Marisol had not specifically designated a place for them, and sit at the kitchen table to do her homework with a look of settled concentration that made it clear the arrangement had been determined entirely by Pilar herself. She never asked for anything. Occasionally she would look up and inform Marisol of a fact she had learned that day, and then return to her work as though the fact had needed witnessing, and Marisol was simply the nearest available witness. "Butterflies taste with their feet," Pilar said one afternoon without looking up from a worksheet. "I didn't know that," Marisol said from the stove. "Yes, you did," Pilar said, with the certainty of a 7-year-old who had recently learned this and assumed that anyone who did not know it was simply not paying attention. Marisol did not correct her. She went back to what she was doing, and the kitchen was quiet in a way that felt, to her own mild surprise, inhabited rather than empty. It was a Tuesday at the end of September when Lucia said the words. It happened without any particular build-up. Marisol was peeling the skin off roasted peppers at the counter, a task that required both hands and most of her attention, and Lucia was at the table eating crackers with the methodical focus she applied to most activities, placing each cracker exactly in the center of her small palm before eating it. Hector was outside. Marco, the boy, 10 years old and increasingly sure of himself in the barn, had gone back to the small house for something he'd forgotten. Lucia looked up from her cracker.
"Señora Mamá,"
she said. Marisol's hands stopped.
"Can I have agua?"
The question was ordinary. The name was not. Marisol turned slowly from the counter, and she looked at Lucia, who was looking back at her with the uncomplicated expectation of a child who had asked a reasonable question and was waiting for a reasonable answer.
"Yes,"
Marisol said. Her voice came out level.
"Of course you can."
She got the water. She set it in front of Lucia. She went back to the peppers, and her hands resumed their work, and she did not look at the window or the door or the shelf where Roberto's mug sat, blue and chipped and still there. She just peeled the peppers and listened to Lucia drink. When Hector came in for lunch an hour later, the moment had passed through the kitchen and left no visible mark. But it stayed in Marisol like a coal stays in ash, not burning, not out, just present beneath the surface, capable of warmth if you got close enough. She did not tell him what Lucia had said. She was not ready to look directly at what that meant, and she had learned that the things you're not ready for have a way of waiting if you let them, and a way of insisting if you don't. She chose to let it wait. The letter came on a Wednesday. It was in a manila envelope with the return address of a law office in Alpine, and Marisol opened it at the kitchen table after Hector had gone back out and the children were at school. She read it twice because the first time her eyes moved over the words without fully landing on them, which was what happened when something arrived that she had been expecting, not quite consciously, and was therefore unprepared for consciously. The letter described a claim by one Aurelio Vega, proprietor of the Rancho Las Cruces to the north and west of the Cielo Quieto property line, regarding what it called the historical water rights dispute along the shared drainage corridor known locally as the Arroyo Seco Channel. It was polite, which was the most dangerous kind of letter. It said nothing directly threatening. It said only that Mr. Vega wished to open dialogue regarding these historic claims and that failure to respond within 30 days might necessitate further action. Marisol set the letter on the table and looked out the window at the north pasture. She knew what this was. She had known it was coming in some form since 3 years ago, when Aurelio Vega had shown up at her door 6 months after Roberto's funeral and offered to buy the ranch's western 40 acres at a price that was meant to look generous and was not. She had declined. He had smiled the way men smile when they are translating a no into a not yet, and gone home. And for 3 years there had been small frictions. The road easement dispute, the fence line disagreement, the county water board meeting where he'd spoken longer than anyone else about future allocation concerns. And now, this. She folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it in the folder she kept in the top drawer of the kitchen sideboard, next to Roberto's cattle records and the property deed and the insurance papers. She did not take it out again that day, but it sat in the drawer the way such things sit. Not loudly, just steadily, like water finding a low point. Don Aurelio Vega came to the ranch the following Saturday. He came in a clean truck, which was how he came everywhere, and he wore a hat that was newer than anything on Marisol's property. He was 60 years old and had the particular bearing of a man who had inherited a great deal and then worked hard enough to feel that he deserved it. He was not, on the surface, unpleasant. He greeted Marisol by her first name, which he had done since Roberto's funeral, and which she had never corrected, because correcting it would have required acknowledging that it bothered her, and she preferred not to give him that. "Marisol," he said when she came out to meet him in the yard. "You look well." "Don Aurelio," she said. He looked around the yard with the particular slowness of a man who is assessing, though he did it in the manner of a man who is simply admiring. "The place is looking good. You've got someone working the fences, I see." "I do," she said. "New hand?" "Yes," he nodded, still looking at the barn, the repaired gate, the patched porch of the small house. "I wanted to come by personally about the letter my lawyers sent. I didn't want you to feel that it was adversarial." "I don't feel anything about it yet," she said. He smiled. "That's very sensible of you. What I'd like is simply to sit down and talk through what a fair arrangement might look like. The arroyo is something we've left ambiguous for too long, and it's not serving either of us." "I'll have my lawyer respond to your lawyer," she said. "That's the appropriate channel." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite displeasure, more like the recalibration of someone who had come expecting one kind of conversation and found a different one waiting. "Of course," he said. "I just thought, neighbor to neighbor, it might be simpler." "Simpler isn't always better," she said. He put his hat back on. He looked past her toward the small house where Lucia had appeared in the doorway watching the exchange with the frank stare of a 3-year-old. "That your grandchild?"
"That's Lucia," Marisol said. "She lives here."
"I see," he said. There was a particular weight in those 2 words that she chose not to unpack in his presence. He tipped his hat and said goodbye and got back in his clean truck and drove away, raising dust all the way to the road. And Marisol watched the dust until it settled. When she turned around, Hector was standing at the corner of the barn. He had not come forward. He had not needed to. He looked at her and she looked at him, and she said, "You can come out now." And he walked over and stood beside her, looking down the empty road. "I know who he is," Hector said. "Most people around here do," she said. "Don Ceferino warned me before I came. Said if I ended up working near Terlingua, to know which direction that family's land runs." Marisol glanced at him.
"He didn't mention that in his reference."
"He didn't know I'd be coming here specifically," Hector said. "But he knows Vega's family. He said they don't give up on what they think belongs to them, even if it never did." She looked back at the road. The dust was gone now. "That's accurate," she said. That evening, after dinner, while the children were washing up and the kitchen was moving through its end-of-day settling, Diego, her son, calling from Odessa, asked again about the new hand. She told him more this time, that Hector was competent, that the ranch was running better than it had in 2 years, that she was thinking about the October branding and would need Diego for at least a weekend. "Mama," Diego said, "is there something you're not telling me?"
"There are many things I'm not telling you,"
she said. "That's not new." He exhaled, which she had learned to interpret as the sound he made when he was deciding to be patient. "I'll come in October," he said. "Good," she said. She had not told him about Vega's letter either. One thing at a time, she had always believed. Sequence was the difference between managing what you had and being managed by it. A man who stayed when he didn't have to. October came in hard and yellow, the way it does in that part of the country, when the light goes flat and bright at the same time, and the hills shed their summer green and go to the color of old straw. The cattle were restless with the change of season, feeling it in their bones before the people did, and the mornings smelled like caliche dust and the cold edge of something coming. Branding week was the hardest week of the ranching year, and Marisol had learned to measure the quality of a worker not by what he did in the easy months, but by what he did when the pens were full and the irons were hot, and there were 3 things happening at once that all needed someone's full attention. She had seen men who were composed and capable in ordinary work become fragmented under that pressure, shouting when they should have been calm, moving when they should have been still, looking at her for direction in moments when she needed them to have direction of their own. Hector was not that. He was in the pen before she was on branding morning, which she had expected by now, but still registered. He had set up the working area the way she had described it 2 weeks earlier, from a single conversation in which she had explained the sequence once, and he had asked 2 questions and not asked any more. When Diego arrived on Friday evening and walked out to the barn to get the measure of things, Hector shook his hand and showed him the layout without drama, and Diego, who had a habit of going quiet when he was forming opinions, went quiet in the particular way that meant the opinion was cautiously positive. They worked 3 days, side by side, the 4 of them, Marisol, Hector, Diego, and a neighbor boy named Tomas who came on branding days for wages. The work was loud and physical and left little room for anything except the task immediately in front of you, which was one of the things Marisol had always quietly valued about it. There was no space in a working pen for the thoughts that accumulated in the kitchen at night, or in the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the ranch was at its most silent and she was at her least defended. On the second day, in the late afternoon, the sky to the west went the color of a bruise, and the wind came up cold from the northwest. And before Marisol could make a decision about whether to finish the remaining animals or get the herd into the enclosed pen, Hector was already moving the cattle without being asked, guiding them into shelter in that unhurried, certain way that good cattle workers have, as though he and the animals had reached a private agreement about what was going to happen next. She stood at the fence and watched him work, and the wind pushed her hair across her face, and she pushed it back, and she thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that Roberto would have liked him. The thought arrived without her permission, and she let it pass without examining it too closely. The rain came that evening, after dinner, steady and gray, and the children were inside the small house with the lamp on, and Diego was in the spare room of the main house reading something on his phone, and Marisol came out onto her covered porch with a cup of coffee that was mostly an excuse to stand outside for a while. Hector was already there. He was sitting on the steps, not in the rocking chair, which she noticed because most people gravitated to the rocking chair and he hadn't. He had a cup of his own, coffee, she could smell it, and he was looking out at the rain coming down across the yard, and he did not seem uncomfortable with being found there. He moved slightly when he heard her, not standing, just making it clear he had registered her presence, and she took the rocking chair and sat down, and they both looked at the rain for a while without speaking.
Long day,
She said eventually. Good one, though, he said. The rain made a sound like paper being handled carefully on the tin roof overhang, and the cattle were quiet in the closed pen, and beyond the barn the hills had gone invisible in the dark and the wet.
You know how to run cattle, she said. I mean, you know it the way you're born knowing something, not the way you learn it.
He was quiet for a moment. My grandfather had a place in Chihuahua. We went every summer when I was small. He had about 40 head and a dog that worked better than most men I've employed. He turned the cup in his hands. My father came north when I was 8, and we didn't go back. But some things stay with you, whether you keep them or not. She understood that precisely.
What did your father do here?
Construction, whatever there was. He paused. He was a good man. He did what he had to do. I think about that now that I'm doing what I have to do, and I wonder if he ever thought there was a difference between that and what he wanted to do. Marisol looked at the rain.
Was there one? For him?
I think so, Hector said. I think he wanted to have land. He died in a rented house. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Roberto, she said, and the name came out steadily, which still sometimes surprised her. Wanted to build something that lasted after him. He was very particular about it. He kept records for everything, not because the bank required it, but because he believed that things written down outlast the person who wrote them. She paused. I used to tease him about it. I called him the family archivist. Hector smiled without looking at her. Elena, he said, and it was the first time he had said her name aloud to Marisol, was the one who remembered everything instead. She didn't write it down. She just held it. The dates, the names, what people said to her 10 years ago. I used to tell her her mind was a better record than any notebook. He stopped. I've been trying to remember things the way she did, since afterward. I'm not good at it. I write things down now, because I don't trust my memory the way I trusted hers. The rain came down. A long minute passed. How did she? Marisol started. Childbirth, he said, simply. Lucia was born early, and there were problems, and I wasn't there in time. He said it the way a man says something he has said to himself 10,000 times and learned to say without flinching, which is not the same as saying it without feeling. I'm sorry, she said. Roberto? A machine, she said. In the back 40, he was alone. She kept her eyes on the rain. We had argued that morning about something that I no longer remember the substance of, which is its own kind of punishment.
I watched the ambulance go back down the road, and I spent 4 hours sitting in the kitchen before I could get up and call Diego. Neither of them spoke for a while. "I don't know why I told you that," she said.
Because it was raining, Hector said, and we were both tired. And those are the conditions under which the truth fits through the door. She looked at him then. He was still looking at the rain, his profile quiet and ordinary and somehow exactly itself. She thought, he is good at this, at being present without requiring anything of the present moment. "The coffee's getting cold," she said. "Yes," he said. They went in separately, 10 minutes apart, which was not a plan but also was not an accident. The discovery of the notebook happened the following week. Hector was clearing the back section of the storage barn, a project he had proposed and she had agreed to, because the barn's back third had been accumulating objects for years in the way that back sections of storage barns do, through the slow accretion of things that are too useful to discard and not useful enough to put somewhere intentional. He had been at it 2 days, bringing Marisol a question every few hours about what to keep, what to move, what to let go. On the third afternoon, he came to the kitchen door and knocked, which he still did, though she had told him twice he didn't need to. "I found something," he said. "I think you should see it." He had it in his hands, a composition notebook, the kind with the black and white marbled cover, weathered and slightly warped from the humidity of the barn over 3 years. He held it the way you hold something that belongs to someone else, carefully and without claim. She took it from him at the door and looked at the cover, where Roberto had written in his careful, angular hand, "Water and Boundary, Cielo Quieto, R. Delgado." Below that, a date, the year they had first disputed the Arroyo boundary with the Vega property, which was 7 years ago. She sat down at the kitchen table with it. She did not open it right away. She just sat with it, her hands on the cover, the way you sit with a letter before you read it when you already know it contains something significant. Hector got her a glass of water without being asked and set it beside her and went back outside. She opened the notebook. Roberto's handwriting covered every page. Dates, measurements, descriptions of the Arroyo's water flow at different times of year, references to county surveys, names of neighbors and county officials and their positions on allocation, hand-drawn maps with measurements noted in the margins. It was 7 years of careful documentation, written in the manner of a man who had understood that someday someone might try to rewrite what had actually happened, and had decided not to let them. She sat with it until the light through the kitchen window went from afternoon gold to evening orange to the particular blue-gray of dusk. And then she got up and turned the lamp on and sat back down and read it again from the beginning. When Hector came in for dinner, he saw it still open on the table, and he looked at her face and he said nothing about it. He made dinner. He had started making dinner on alternating days, another renegotiation that had happened without being formally proposed. And they ate, and the children ate. And at some point, Lucia climbed into Marisol's lap uninvited and stayed there through the second half of the meal. And Marisol let her, one arm around the small, warm weight of her, the other hand still near the notebook. "He knew," she said after the children had gone. "He knew 7 years ago that this was going to happen. He built the record anyway." "Then the record is there," Hector said. "Vega's lawyers are going to argue that it's not valid, that it's just handwritten notes, that it doesn't constitute." "But it does," Hector said. "If there are dates and witnesses and measurements, it matters. My father's construction foreman told him once, 'A written record from a reasonable man is worth more in a courtroom than a lawyer's speech, because it was made before the lawyer existed.'" She looked at him. "You know something about this."
"A little. One of Don Ceferino's sons is an attorney. I drove him to Alpine once when his truck broke down. We talked for 4 hours. It's amazing what you learn in a truck for 4 hours.
She almost smiled. She almost. And then she did. And it was brief and quiet, but it was there. She closed the notebook and held it.
I'm going to need to show this to someone who understands what it's worth.
Yes, he said.
And I'm going to need...
She stopped. What?
I'm going to need it to be enough,
she said. The words came out smaller than she intended, which was the most honest they had been. He looked at her across the table, the lamp between them making the kitchen warm and close. It's a start, he said. And a start from a man who planned ahead is usually more than a start. She set the notebook down carefully in the center of the table, where it stayed for the rest of the evening, like an answered question that had taken 7 years to arrive. What the lawyer's letter said. The second letter arrived on a November Monday, and it was not polite. Marisol read it standing at the kitchen counter, still in her barn jacket, before she had taken her boots off, which was a thing she never did. She was particular about barn boots and kitchen floors. But she had taken the envelope from the mailbox at the road and opened it in the truck and been reading it in small increments all the way back down the drive, which was not the same as sitting down and reading it properly, which is what she did now, at the counter, in her barn boots, with the mud still on them. The letter was from a different attorney, a firm in Midland, larger than the Alpine office, which was itself a statement. It outlined in formal language what it called a formal claim under Section 11.143 of the Texas Water Code regarding disputed appropriation rights along the Arroyo Seco corridor. It also contained, in the third paragraph, a clause that Marisol read 3 times, and which each time said the same thing, that under the terms of the late Roberto Delgado's property will, as filed with Brewster County, the operational management of Cielo Quieto was contingent upon maintenance of what the will described as a family household in active residence, and that Mr. Vega's legal team had reason to believe this condition was not being met, and that this might constitute grounds for a secondary petition regarding the property's operational standing. She put the letter down on the counter. She picked it up and read the third paragraph again. She put it down and went to the back room where Roberto's legal files were kept, and found the copy of the will that she had read twice, 3 years ago, and not looked at since. She found the clause. It was there, in Roberto's careful, bureaucratic phrasing, written in a time when the meaning of it had seemed obvious. The property shall remain in the continuous operational management of the Delgado family household, defined as the primary residence of at least one adult member of the Delgado family in active cohabitation. Roberto had written it to protect the ranch from being rented out or handed to a management company. He had not written it, could not have written it, to be used against her, his wife, in this particular way. But Vega's lawyers were good at finding the use that the words had not intended. She stood in the back room for a long time. Through the window she could see the yard and the small house and the barn, and she could see Hector crossing the yard from the equipment shed with something in his hand, walking in that even-paced way of his that she had come to recognize at a distance, the way you recognize a person's particular walk before their face resolves out of the distance. She went back to the kitchen. She put the letter on the table. She sat down and put her hands flat on either side of it and looked at it until she heard the back door open at lunchtime and his boots on the mat. He came in, saw her face, and stopped. She did not say good morning or wash your hands or any of the things she normally said by way of greeting. She said, "Sit down. I need to show you something." He sat. She slid the letter across the table. He read it without speaking. She watched his face, which was the way she had learned to know what he was thinking, because he was not a man who announced his thoughts, but they moved in him visibly if you knew where to look. She saw him read the water claim section without reaction, and she saw him slow down when he reached the third paragraph, and she saw him go back and read it again. He set the letter down. "They're claiming the will clause isn't met," he said. "Yes, because you're a woman living alone." "That's what it amounts to." He was quiet. She could hear the clock on the kitchen wall, which she usually couldn't hear because there was always something else making noise. He looked at the letter, then at his hands, then at her.
Marisol,
He said, and the way he said her name was different from how he usually said it, which was the way you say someone's name when you're about to say something you've been holding and have decided to stop holding. I want to say something, and I need you to hear all of it before you answer. All right, she said. When I said yes at your back door in September, he said, I said yes to the arrangement you described, which was practical and clear, and I understood exactly what it was. He stopped. He looked at the table, then back at her. But I have been here for 3 months, and what I've understood in 3 months is that I don't want this to be an arrangement anymore. I want to sign the paper. The actual paper, the real one, not because of the will clause and not because of Vega, but because— He stopped again. She watched him work through what he was trying to say with the same effortful honesty she had watched him apply to every physical task she had ever given him. Because I don't want to be a man who stays in someone's life the way you stay in a temporary situation, he said. I want to be here, actually here, and I think— I'm not certain because I've been wrong about things, but I think maybe you're in the same place. And I think the only reason we haven't said so is because we both built very good walls around the practical reasons and stayed inside them. The kitchen clock marked the seconds. Marisol looked at him for a long time. She thought about Roberto's mug on the shelf. She thought about the notebook on the table in the back room. She thought about Lucia saying, Signora Mama, and the cat named Nube, and the way Hector had moved the cattle in the rain without being asked, and the evening on the porch when they had told each other the true versions of their lives for the first time. I don't know if I can do this right, she said. The words came out exactly as she intended them, not a refusal, not a yes, but the truest thing she had available in that moment. Neither do I, he said. That's not reassuring, she said. No, he said. But it's honest. She looked at the letter. She looked at him. She stood up from the table and went to the back room and came back with the notebook. Roberto's notebook, the marbled cover, the 7 years of careful record. She set it on the table next to the lawyer's letter, and she looked at the two things together. One document written to harm her, and one written to protect her, by a man who had loved her and was 3 years in the ground. I'm going to need to take this to a lawyer, she said. The notebook. And we're going to need to deal with the will clause. She looked up. If you're saying what I think you're saying, then say it clearly, because I have never in my life made a decision based on something that wasn't said clearly. He met her eyes. I want to sign the actual marriage certificate, he said, because I want this to be real, not because of the letter. She held his gaze for a moment that felt longer than it was. The practical problem and the true thing are both true at the same time, she said finally. I can hold both. So can I, he said. She nodded once. She sat back down. She pulled the lawyer's letter toward her and the notebook beside it, and she said, Then we start here. We take this to someone who can tell us what the notebook is worth in a courtroom, and we go from there. And we don't. She stopped. Something in her voice had shifted, and she steadied it. We don't make it smaller than it is by treating it like a crisis. This is not a crisis. This is a situation, and situations have solutions. Yes, he said. But I need you to know, she said, and she looked at him directly, that I'm not there yet. With all of it, I'm close, but I'm not there, and I won't pretend I am. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to be there yet. I'm asking you to let the possibility be there. She was quiet for a moment. The possibility, she said, has been there for a while. He nodded. He did not say anything more. She respected that very specifically. They were still sitting at the table, the letter and the notebook between them, when they heard Diego's truck on the drive, raising dust and then silence as it pulled into the yard. And through the window, they could see him getting out and reaching back into the cab for his bag, coming home for the weekend because the branding had gone well, and she had invited him, and he had said yes. And now he was here, and neither of them at the table had told him yet. Marisol stood up. She put both documents in the folder. She met Hector's eyes for one moment across the table. "One thing at a time," she said. Sequence. She had always believed in sequence. He nodded. She went to open the door. The ranch that stayed, and the man who did too. Diego set his bag down in the kitchen and looked at the folder on the counter, and at his mother's face, and at Hector, who was still at the table with his coffee. And Diego did the thing he had always done when he was assessing a situation, which was to go very still and let his eyes do the work before his mouth did any. "Sit down," Marisol said. "I'll make lunch and we'll talk." "What are we talking about?" Diego asked. "Sit down first," she said. He sat. Hector moved to stand and Marisol said, "Stay," without looking at him, and he stayed. She made lunch, tortillas and eggs and the leftover beans from the morning, the work of her hands on automatic while her mind arranged what needed to be said in the order it needed to be said. She told Diego about the letters while she cooked. First, the September letter, then Vega's visit, then the Midland firm's letter and the will clause. She set the food on the table and sat down and watched her son's face do what Hector's had done. Slow as it reached the third paragraph, and go careful and tight. "He found the clause in Papa's will," Diego said. "His lawyers did, yes." "That's—" Diego stopped. He turned the words over. "That's clever. That's a cheap kind of clever, but it's clever." "Yes," Marisol said. "And the arrangement with Hector?" Diego said, and now his eyes moved to Hector, clear and measuring. "Is meant to address that." The kitchen was quiet. "It was meant to address several things," Marisol said. "It still does." Diego looked at her. He looked at Hector. He looked back at his mother. And then he said the thing she had known was coming since October, the thing she had been carrying in the back of her chest like a stone. "Did you even grieve him, Mama? Or did you just move on?" The words landed the way blunt things land, not like a cut, like a weight. Marisol did not flinch, but she felt the table under her hands and held it. Hector, beside her, did not speak. He stood up. He went to the back room, and he came back with the marbled notebook, and he set it on the table in front of Diego. Not gently, not roughly, just present. He set it down like setting a fact in front of someone who needs one. And then he said, "I'm going to check the south fence." And he took his hat from the hook by the door, and he went out. And the screen door settled behind him, and Marisol and her son were alone with the notebook and the cold eggs and the question still in the air. Diego looked at the notebook. He looked at the door. He looked at his mother. "Open it," she said. He read it for a long time. Marisol cleared the table around him and washed the dishes and made coffee and brought him a cup, and he took it without looking up. He read in the focused, slow way he had read since he was a child, his mouth moving slightly on the difficult passages, his brow pulling together at the dates, his hand going once to trace the edge of one of Roberto's hand-drawn maps, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. She sat across from him and let him read. She did not watch him constantly, but she checked in, the way you check the sky when you're not sure if the weather is turning. When he finally set the notebook down, his face was different from when he had picked it up. Not resolved, but opened, like a door that had been painted shut for a long time, and someone had finally applied enough heat that the paint let go. "He knew," Diego said. "He started keeping these records 7 years ago," she said, "before you came back the last time for summer, before you went to university. He knew Vega was watching the Arroyo, and he decided to be the one with the longer memory." Diego pressed his thumb to the corner of the notebook's cover.
He never told me. He didn't tell me either. Not directly. He told me the ranch was protected. I believed him, but I didn't know this was how.
Her son was quiet for a long while. Outside, she could hear the soft sounds of the yard, a cow, the wind in the dry grass of the north pasture, somewhere the faint clang of Hector at the south fence.
I'm sorry, Diego said. What I said before. You meant it, she said.
I meant the fear behind it, he said, which was more precise than she had expected from him, and she felt a small particular pride at that precision.
I didn't mean... I know you grieved him. I know you're still grieving him. He looked at his hands. I see this man in your kitchen every day when I call. I hear his kids in the background. And I thought, you thought, I was trying to replace something that can't be replaced, she said. Yes. No one is replacing anything, she said. Your father is in this notebook. He's in the south fence line and the water records, and in the way this land still knows what he wanted it to be. That doesn't disappear because there is someone new in the yard.
Diego looked at her. His eyes were wet, which he was pretending they were not.
He's a good man. He brought this notebook to me, she said. He found it in the back barn, and he held it the way you hold something that belongs to someone else, and he brought it to me and asked nothing.
Her son wiped his eye with the back of his hand, quickly, in the manner of a man who has been raised not to make a production of this kind of thing. He looked out the window. After a while, he said, The fence on the south side was always the one Papa was worried about.
I know, she said. Do you need me to go help? I think, she said, that would be a good idea.
He went. She watched through the window, her son crossing the yard in his city clothes, still awkward in them the way he always was when he came back, and Hector at the fence line looking up when Diego approached, and the two of them standing together for a moment before Diego took the other end of the wire without being asked. She stood at the window for a while. She thought about sequence. She thought about what it meant to hold two true things at the same time and not require them to resolve into one. She turned back to the kitchen. She took Roberto's mug from the shelf. She held it for a moment. The dark blue ceramic, the small chip on the handle, the particular heft of it. She held it long enough to be finished with what she needed to be finished with, and then she opened the cabinet and set it inside, behind her own mug, but not out of reach, and closed the cabinet door. The hearing at the Brewster County Courthouse in Alpine happened on a Thursday in late November, on a day that was cold and bright in the way that high desert November days are cold and bright. Everything too clear and too sharp, no cloud to soften the edges. Don Aurelio Vega arrived with two lawyers, the man from the Alpine firm and the woman from the Midland firm, and he wore his good hat and his particular expression of settled authority, and he did not look at Marisol when he came in, which she knew from experience meant he was more uncertain than he appeared. Marisol arrived with her own lawyer, a woman named Clara Reyes from Marfa, whom Don Ceferino's son had recommended and who had read the notebook twice and said, "This is exactly what we need," in a tone that meant she had dealt with cases where people did not have exactly what they needed, and the difference was significant. They filed the notebook as an exhibit. Clara submitted alongside it the signed statements of three neighboring families, the Montoya family to the east, old Mr. Pilcher 2 miles south, and the Aguirre family, whose grandmother had lived in the area since before the county had paved the road, all of whom gave written testimony confirming the historical flow patterns of the Arroyo Seco and the Delgado Ranch's relationship to it, going back decades. Vega's lawyers argued strenuously. They questioned the notebook's admissibility, its authorship, its precision. The judge, a woman with reading glasses who had been in that chair for 16 years and had the bearing of someone who had heard most arguments at least twice before, let them argue, and then asked Clara Reyes 3 specific questions about the notebook's dates and cross-references. and listened to the answers. And when the Midland attorney tried to raise the will clause as a secondary petition, the judge said briskly, "That's not what we're here for today. Let's stay in our lane." It was over in 2 hours. The water rights claim was denied on its merits. The county would conduct its own survey in the spring to formalize the existing boundary. Vega had 45 days to respond or accept. He accepted the ruling in the room because his lawyers, whatever their other qualities, were realists. But in the hallway outside, as Marisol was putting her coat on and Clara was gathering her files, he came and stood in front of her, just close enough that she would have to look up at him. "You'll find something else comes up," he said quietly. "Things always do." Marisol looked at him evenly. She did not raise her voice because she had never needed to. "Don Aurelio," she said, "my husband spent 7 years writing down the truth so that it would still be true when he wasn't here to say it. I intend to spend whatever years I have left doing the same. You should probably factor that in." He stood there a moment longer. Then he put on his hat. Then he went out through the courthouse door, and the cold light came in briefly, and then was gone. Hector was leaning against the truck in the parking lot. He had not come inside. There had been no reason for him to be inside. But he had come with her, and he was there, which was exactly what she needed him to be. She walked out into the cold, clear air. She stopped in front of him. "Well," he said. "We won," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "And you're all right?" "Ask me in an hour," she said. "Okay," he said, and he opened the passenger door for her, which he had never done before, and she got in, and they drove back toward the ranch through the flat, bright November countryside, with the mountains to the south going blue in the afternoon light, and the road ahead of them empty and clear. She reached across and put her hand over his on the gear shift. She did not say anything. Neither did he. They drove like that for the better part of an hour, which was enough. There were still the practical things. Clara's fees had come to more than Marisol had hoped, which meant the winter fund was lean in a way it had not been in years, and the water heater in the main house chose December to express its dissatisfaction with its own age. And the heifer, that had been healthy all fall, went lame on the left front leg and required 3 weeks of careful management before she was sound again. These were not catastrophes. They were the ordinary weight of a ranch in winter, which Marisol had learned to carry and was still learning not to carry entirely alone. What was different was that she did not have to carry them in the way she had for 3 years, by herself, in the silence of the main house after 8 in the evening, with the decisions settling around her in the dark like sediment. Hector was there. He was there at the kitchen table with the ledger, going over the numbers with her without sugarcoating them and without catastrophizing either, which was the right register, the one she needed. He was there on the cold morning when the heifer was at her worst, standing next to the veterinarian and asking the right questions. And he was there when the water heater finally surrendered, and he said, "I can do most of this myself if you can get the parts." And she said, "I can get the parts." And he did. Diego came back in December. He stayed 4 days, and on the second evening he and Hector sat at the kitchen table after dinner while Marisol was in the other room, and she could hear the low register of their voices. Not what they were saying, just the sound of it. 2 men at a table, finding the shape of something new. Diego laughed once, a real laugh, unguarded in the way his laughs were when he forgot he was managing something. She stayed where she was and let them have it. The wedding was small, on a Saturday morning in January, when the air smelled like cold stone and the sky was the color of pale blue paper. Clara Reyes, who had turned out to be a friend as much as a lawyer, witnessed the signing. The Montoya family came. Old Mr. Pilcher came and stood in the back and shook Hector's hand with both of his. Diego stood beside his mother, and at a certain point during the brief ceremony, he put his arm around her, and she let him. And for a moment the kitchen was full of a particular warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. Marco and Pilar stood with their father. Lucia stood between both families, between Hector and Marisol and Diego, rotating to face whoever was speaking, following the sequence of it with her complete small attention. There was cake afterward, made by Pilar, who had decided without consulting anyone that she was going to learn to bake, and had been doing so, with mixed but earnest results since October. This cake was lopsided, and the frosting had a determined quality to it that spoke to effort rather than skill, and it was the best thing Marisol had eaten in a long time. 8 months later, on a morning in September, a Tuesday, which was the day the blue truck had come up the drive a year ago, the ranch was green again from an August that had been generous with rain, and the morning light came across the east pasture the way it does after good rain. The kind of light that looks like it is considering the landscape carefully before committing to it. Lucia was in the barn with Nube, who had gained weight and opinions since the previous autumn. She was explaining something to the cat in a mix of English and Spanish that would have required a professional interpreter, but seemed to be understood by the cat, who sat in the hay and blinked with philosophical patience. Marco, at 11, had developed the quiet authority of a boy who knows how to work, and has decided this is not a bad thing to know. He was at the water trough when Hector passed him, and he said, without looking up, "The east tap is dripping again." And Hector said, "I know, I'll get to it after the feed run." And Marco nodded and went back to what he was doing. 2 months ago, he had called Marisol Señora, and then, one unremarkable Tuesday, he had said, "Marisol," and neither of them had made anything of it, which was the correct way to handle it. Pilar had informed the household that she intended to be a veterinarian. She had books about it. She had asked Marisol's opinion about whether you needed to be good at math, and Marisol had said yes, and Pilar had accepted this with the resigned pragmatism of someone filing a task under necessary but unfortunate and continuing forward. Diego called on Thursdays and sometimes Sundays. He asked after Hector, which he had not done in October, which Marisol noted without comment. He was talking about coming for Christmas and maybe bringing a friend from Odessa, which was new and which Marisol received with careful neutrality until she had more information. On the evening of that September Tuesday, Marisol and Hector were on the porch. They had been there for 20 minutes, not by agreement, but because they had both found themselves there independently as the day wound down, which had become a pattern without being named as one. The light over the hills to the west was going from orange to the deep red that means the day is truly finished, and the cattle were moving slowly in the near pasture, that unhurried end-of-day drifting that always looked like a large collective thought. Roberto's cattle records were in the filing cabinet in the back room, organized and intact. His notebook was in Clara Reyes's office, filed and registered as part of the county water boundary documentation. Roberto's mug was in the cabinet, behind Marisol's, but not gone. The land was there, the south fence repaired, the east trough addressed, the arroyo seco running at its proper levels in its proper channel. The notebook's measurements had held. The truth Roberto had written down 7 years ago in a cold barn had done exactly what he had written it to do. Hector put his coffee cup on the porch rail and looked out at the hills. "Marco's getting fast with the cattle," he said. "He is," she said. "He's got the instinct." "He's got your instinct." She considered that. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he just watched long enough to learn something." Hector glanced at her sideways. There was a particular quality to the quiet between them that was not empty. It was the kind of quiet that has already held a great deal and is comfortable with its own fullness. She had not known a year ago that quiet could be like that. She had thought quiet was just the absence of noise. The last light went behind the hills. The sky shifted from red to a deep and satisfied blue. "Good day," Hector said. "Yes," she said. "It was." She reached over and picked up his empty cup along with her own and stood up from the chair. He stood when she did, which he still did, and she had not told him to stop because she had discovered she did not want to. They went in together, the screen door swinging behind them, the kitchen lamp coming on yellow and warm, the sounds of children somewhere in the small house carrying through the evening air. Lucia explaining something to the cat, probably, or to anyone who would listen, and the ranch settling in around all of it, doing what good land does at the end of the day, holding still, holding fast, simply there.